We're talking today with John Baxter of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, John, start us off with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
Born here in Grand Rapids, 1944.
All right. Did you grow up here, or did you move around?
I moved around and ended up coming back here about 20 years ago in 1999.
Okay. What was your family doing for a living when you were a kid?
My father ran a laundry here in town, and his father and great-grandfather started it.
Mm-hmm.
It was a small haberdashery store on 55 Monroe Street.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And where'd you go to high school?
I went to high school in Connecticut,
Okay.
in Simsbury, Connecticut, graduated in 1963.
All right. And what did you do after high school?
After high school, I got my master's in poker, or playing cards, and in drinking and in parties. I spent 1 year at a four-year college in Illinois, and then I futzed around a little bit, and I worked part-time and then full-time here in Grand Rapids, and did poorly at Grand Rapids Junior College, and then decided, since I'm going to get drafted anyway, I'll join the Navy.
Okay. So when did you enlist?
1966.
Okay, which is right when the really big wave of drafts was happening.
Right.
Okay. Now, was there a lot of competition to get into the Navy, or at that point were they pretty open to taking people?
They were pretty open to taking people. I wanted to be an officer, but with the Navy, you can't become an officer unless you have at least a bachelor's.
Right. Okay. So you enlist in the Navy, and do they send you to boot camp at Great Lakes? Or?
Yes, boot camp at Great Lakes.
So Great Lakes, Illinois, north of Chicago. All right. So what was that like?
Very interesting wake-up call. I found that I wasn't terribly fond of taking orders. Realized that I didn't have much choice, and I was the educational petty officer for our company. Excuse me, and sort of enjoyed it. But we were a Hall of Fame company. We won every single award that was possible for companies in our battalion to win, and we graduated in June, so it was like 3 months.
Okay.
People from all walks of life, which was very educational in its own way.
All right. Now, you kind of present yourself as having been something of a misfit or whatever before going in. How did you wind up in a leadership position in your training company?
Was chosen by the company commander.
Okay.
And he said, Baxter, you're the educational petty officer, and you damn sure better make sure that nobody flunks any of our tests.
Mm-hmm.
I went, yes, sir.
Okay. When you were in boot camp, how much of an emphasis was there on sort of discipline and following orders?
100%.
And how long did it take you to kind of adjust to that?
About a week.
Okay.
And our company commander was a chief boiler technician called Chief Westcott. And he would kick us in the rear with his combat boots and say, you damn sure better shape up, because if you go over to Vietnam, I don't want your death to be on me.
Mm-hmm.
So get your ass in gear.
Okay. All right, and so how long was boot camp?
4 months.
Okay. Did you get any training beyond the most basic stuff there?
No.
Okay.
None. Not at that point.
Okay. Because I guess later on it was shorter, but you were still 66 at this point, so.
Right.
Yeah, okay. All right. And then once you complete that, now what happens?
You can put in for a school and hopefully you'll be given that school. I put in for quartermaster school because I wanted to be up on the bridge with navigation and much more technical parts of the ship.
Mm-hmm.
And I was selected for damage control school, and said I don't want to do that. And so I ended up choosing to not go to damage control school, and was told that, well, in that case, you're going to go on board a ship and you're going to end up chipping paint.
Mm-hmm.
I said, okay, fine. And so I ended up, excuse me, they ended up sending me to on a Bureau of Naval Personnel controlled billet to NATO military headquarters in Norfolk, Virginia.
And what was your job there?
I was a storekeeper. I was striking for storekeeper, which means if you don't go to school, then you can study on your own, and if you make it, then you end up becoming a storekeeper third class, which is an E4. NATO military procurement has nothing to do with the U.S. Navy.
Mm-hmm.
They do their own thing. So I got the book at night and I read through it, and I passed the test for third class, and then I studied some more and then passed the test for second class, E5. And I think that was when people were getting rate fast. In other words, they were increasing in promotion fast. And so at the end of the 2 years there, I was a storekeeper second class in E5. I'd never had any Navy storekeeping.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What were you actually doing for those 2 years with the NATO?
Typing requisitions, moving furniture, custodian of flags for NATO, and also an admiral's driver.
Okay. Now, were you working with naval personnel, or were these from different places?
All naval personnel.
Okay.
We did have a joint command, French, British,
Maybe Italian, I don't know.
an Italian or two, yeah.
Or Dutch or something, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And so was that essentially a day job?
Yes, except when I pulled duty, then I was down in transportation and driving foreign dignitaries and naval admirals around.
Did you drive anybody memorable?
Nobody that you would have heard of.
Okay.
Admiral Moorer, Thomas Moorer, who was the Joint Chiefs at the time. Wonderful person. I never drove him, but I had a chance to talk with him 3 or 4 times. Admiral Bell was another admiral, very nice guy. He said, hey, we ended up talking a fair amount, and he said, have you ever thought about the Naval Academy? And I said, yes, sir, I have. And he said, if you want, I'll give you an appointment to go to the Naval Academy. And I said, thank you, sir, I appreciate that very much, but I've got a job waiting for me outside, and I want to finish college. And I've already been in the Navy for a year, and that's a 5-year commitment, plus 4 years after that. So I said, I really wasn't planning on making the Navy a career, no offense, sir. And he said, no, none taken. But then one of the other admirals also offered me a spot at the Naval Academy, which I thought was obviously very nice of him to do. I would have loved to have gone to the Naval Academy.
So what do you wind up doing instead? So you finished 2 years.
After about a year and a half at NATO, I'm sitting behind my desk with a glass top on it, typing away, and some of my friends from the same headquarters had gone to Vietnam. And I said to myself, what am I doing here? That's where I should be. So I volunteered for Vietnam.
Okay.
In the Navy, unless you were a gunner's mate, the only way you could get to Vietnam was to volunteer. In the Army, you went. In the Marines, you went. Air Force, I'm not sure of. So I volunteered.
Okay. And once you do that, now what happens and how long does it take to get you to Vietnam?
It took about 2 months, and my requisition was passed through, and I ended up getting orders to counterintelligence SEAL training, which is what is SEAL? Survival, Escape, Resistance, and Evasion School, which is about a 4-week school at Little Creek, and I went through that.
And what did that consist of?
A lot of weapons training, a lot of escape and evasion practice, if you want to call it that, at being interrogated and not giving out any information, with some physical torture as a part of it, and you have to evade in the woods for a week and live off the land, which allows for my dislike or downright hatred of blackberries, because the blackberries were in season and that's all we had for 4 or 5 days.
So when you were doing it, were you with a group or were you with
a group of 8 of us.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Did they waterboard you or something like that?
Close to it, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Because people have described that in the version they did in California, and some of that sounds familiar. Yeah.
They didn't waterboard us. They took us individually into a shack and made us sit at attention, and then hit us round about the head and shoulders. And this interrogator slapped me across the face so hard that I just went like that, and then he did it the other way, and I ended up with blood coming out of my mouth and scabs down here. And every time he'd say, "Who's your commanding officer?" I said, "My name is John Baxter, serial number B503333, U.S. Navy." And he did that 4 or 5 times, and then he said, "Get the hell out of here."
Okay. All right. You go through all of that kind of stuff, and now do they do any other kind of preparation for going overseas, or was that it?
I'm not sure. A lot of really boring classes. Some on Vietnam itself, no language, no history, nothing that would prepare you more for getting to know Vietnam.
Right.
Other than 1 Corps through 4 Corps. So that was about it.
Okay.
And a lot of weapons training.
All right. So when do you actually go to Vietnam?
In July of 1968.
Okay. All right. And how do they get you there?
I fly into San Francisco, sit around for a couple of days, and then another flight to Hawaii, then to Guam, then to Manila in the Philippines, and then into Saigon.
Okay. And what's your first impression of Vietnam when you get there?
Very hot, very smelly.
All right.
Very interesting when you take a look at coming into Tan Son Nhut, which is the air base in Saigon. You can see craters all over the ground, and I looked at that and I said, "Okay."
All right. And once you get off the plane, now what happens to you?
I was supposed to go to MACV headquarters in Saigon, Military Assistance Command Vietnam in Saigon. I was supposed to be at their headquarters, and they changed the orders, and then they said, we'll put you up on the Carnival Hotel, Caravel, Continental Hotel in Saigon with geckos on the wall and a fan in the ceiling and a bar on the roof. And I spent 3 days there, and you go up to the bar and you see the light show, which was the miniguns going off and B-52 bombers putting airstrikes out. You wait up there, and it's very surreal. There are Americans out there in the woods getting shot at, or in the woods, in the jungle getting shot at, and here I am drinking a beer.
Yeah. Well, this is 68, and it's after the original Tet Offensive, and there's an awful lot of stuff going on after that.
Yes,
So,
there was.
all right. And now, what assignment do you finally get?
I ended up going down to Vinh Long, which was the capital of Vinh Long province, about 60 miles south of Saigon in the Mekong Delta,
Okay.
to MACV headquarters, one of their detachments.
Okay. And what was your job there?
I was in charge of procurement for the Navy detachments, 2 Seawolf helicopters, U.S. Navy, 2 divisions of river patrol boats, Mark IIs, and attached to 2 squads of Navy SEALs, as well as standing all kinds of guard duty watches.
Okay. And what kind of physical accommodations did you have there?
Had a bunk, generally slept on the floor on concrete underneath the bunks, because we got, the entire time I was in Vietnam, we got rocketed or shot at or mortared about every 3 days. That was roughly the average.
Okay. And then what were you doing during the day?
During the day, I was typing requisitions, filling whatever needed to be done, supervising 3 other storekeepers, and otherwise I was standing watch on what's called a YR-9, which is a yard repair barge, which housed all of our parts for the guns and for the river patrol boats. And at night, or during the day, we'd shoot clumps of foliage or jungle that had ripped off from one of the rivers that were floating down towards the barge. Because we never knew whether there were any sappers or any Vietnamese frogmen or Viet Cong frogmen under that. So we'd shoot during the day, 45s, AR-15s, M16s, and at night we couldn't shoot because we didn't want to get targeted ourselves, so we'd throw concussion grenades in the water, and we'd see how many concussion grenades we would throw. We'd start with a crate of concussion grenades, and I think that I had a ring of something like 200 rings that were pulled from the concussion grenades.
Now, did you ever actually get attacked by sappers or frogmen?
No,
Okay.
not that I'm aware of. However, they said, you do this. Yes, sir. So we did that until one night the SEALs who were off duty came running up and said, "Stop that shit! I can't sleep." So we stopped it for a while and then went back at it again.
All right. Did you ever see any evidence that you ever hit anything?
No,
Okay.
no.
Just how you were spending your time at that point.
No, then after about 6 months, they split 9 of us from the YR-9. Machinist mate, a gunner's mate, me as a storekeeper, and a couple of others. They split us off to take that YR-9 and all the parts up to a different base. They had a brand new ship come in, and the rest of the people were transferred to that ship. And we ended up going to SEDEC and then METO and CANTO, other detachments. And then to Ben Luck, which is where there were 3 advanced tactical support bases that we supported, and 2 divisions of PBRs, and another group of SEALs. And we were there, and then in March, we got attacked again, and they blew up the ammo dump, which flattened everything. It was about 800 tons of ammo, and there was shrapnel flying all over the place. I got hit by a piece of shrapnel, and I got blown. I was inside the wire 9, and I got blown into the wall, and I had a hell of a concussion. Another guy was blown into the wall, and he broke his arm. A couple people were outside and got hit by shrapnel. I think half a dozen Navy guys were killed, and a bunch of Seawolf helicopters were destroyed, and there were holes in everything. And we could, the wire 9 was facing east, the ammo dump was farther south to us. We stayed on the port side of the ship, and we could hear the shrapnel rattling off the other side of the ship, fairly loud, because some of the pieces were 2 handfuls. Just anyway.
Okay. So now you've been hit. Now what happens? Do you get evacuated, or
No.
do you stay there?
Just stayed there. Ended up running to a bunker, and then we stayed inside the bunker the rest of the night. And then we went back to the wire 9 and tried to clean up, because things were blown all over the place. And there was still some ammo getting cooked off, so there was still the occasional piece of shrapnel. We weren't hit, and the corpsman bandaged up my hand with a Band-Aid. That's about all I needed. He said, "You want me to put you in for a Purple Heart?" And I said, "Hell no." Other people being killed, and all they get's a Purple Heart, and it's a scratch. Doesn't matter. So anyway, and then stayed there. Remember one day, was sitting at a table outside the mess hall that was right next to the PBRs, and one of the PBR sailors was missing from the night before, and I looked up, and right in front of me was a body that was floating in the water, and it was that sailor. And so I had 4 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches that I had made, and they were, oh God, they tasted good. I hadn't had peanut butter and jelly in so long. Anyway, it tasted so good. And so I yelled to one of the other guys, I said, "Get a body bag." So I grabbed onto that sailor's body was floating in the water, and pulled him up onto the other platform, and then put him in a bag and zipped him up. Then I went back and finished my peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Didn't want to waste them.
No.
Anyway.
Okay. I notice here, so you, on your bio sheet here, you also mentioned being with the USS Orion.
Yes, it was a subtender in Norfolk, Virginia. That was after I got
okay, so we're not there yet.
No, we're not there.
All right. When you're in Vietnam, did you ever kind of go into the Vietnamese towns
Yes.
or villages and things? Okay. And
Yes.
what kind of experiences did you have that way?
The young girls, high school age, were just beautiful. They were really just beautiful. I never took advantage. I never went to a whorehouse. I'd go and have some of their food. Food was fantastic. What what was really interesting is that, I took a lot of pictures. Through the Navy Exchange in Yokosuka, Japan, I ordered an Asai Pentax camera, and I took a lot of pictures of the people, and they didn't like the pictures being taken. They thought we were trying to steal their soul.
Mm-hmm.
But they were really fascinating. And yet the Viet Cong would come and they'd throw a satchel charge into the restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
So we couldn't go back into town for 2 or 3 weeks. Then they'd come out again. I remember that in Vinh Long, one time I was in the newest part of town, and bullet holes pockmarked the cement all over the town from Tet.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go into the again, here am I not liking take orders very much.
Mm-hmm.
I went into the old part of Vinh Long, and there was a Papasan squatting down in the Vietnamese manner,
Mm-hmm.
with rubbing a stick between his palms, and he had a string on it, and somehow if you rubbed the stick, he had a drill bit stuck in the bottom of it, and that's how he made that's how he drilled holes and put boxes together. And I went, here you are with modern wartime and electricity, and here's the dichotomy between the two was it really was surreal. And that's the only time I remember something like that.
Mm-hmm.
In Vinh Long, we were all under the rules of engagement. If you were fired upon, you could fire back, and if you weren't fired upon, or you don't have any idea where it came from, then you couldn't fire.
Mm-hmm.
And I was up in the tower of the villa that where we were staying, and I had a 50 caliber machine gun, and through the telescope, about 150 yards out, I could see a line of soldiers going across a dike in blue uniforms. There were about 100 of them. They're just, and they were not South Vietnamese. And I asked for permission to fire and was told no, because I was all ready.
Mm-hmm.
So, oh well.
Yeah.
Another time in Ben Luck, I was having some drinks with a couple of the SEALs. I got to know some of them quite well. Wonderful people, as long as you were straight with them. If you weren't, you were lucky to be alive.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, this one guy said one night, he said, we're going to go out tomorrow night and we're going to kidnap a Viet Cong colonel. You want to come along? And I went, and I'd gone, I don't know whether you know the term, gone Asiatic.
I've heard it, but can you define it?
You just plain don't give a shit.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't give a shit to the point where, I'll tell a couple other stories before that, but anyway, so I said to him, I'd love to, but no. So what do you mean? Are you scared? Use another term for it, but in any case. And I said, no. I said, I am nowhere near the training you have. And I said, I'd get one of you killed. So I don't care if I get killed, screw it. But I don't want to get one of you killed. Oh, fucking A. Yeah, that's right. And here, have another beer. And we never talked about it again. One time when I was in Ben Luck, this is after Vinh Long. One time I was in Ben Luck, we had three guys in the tower, and we had a 50 caliber machine gun, an M60 machine gun, rocket launcher, and personal weapons. This one guy who was scared to death, just come in country, he was talking away. It was like 3 o'clock in the morning. And I told him to shut up. And he kept on talking. And I had him by the neck, and I had him 2/3 of the way out of the tower. And he would have fallen 3 stories. That probably would have killed him. And the other guy pulled me away. And I said, I'm sorry. And that happened once again. Some guy was just being a real asshole. And I had him by the neck again, and I was pushing him down into the lower hold, and stopped. And then at that point I was taken out of the guard tower and put on radio watch, because they realized that, this was June, I think. In any case.
Mm-hmm.
So
it was kind of getting to you after a while.
yeah, it was. And I acquired an AK-47 and took it apart, sent it home for Christmas presents,
Mm-hmm.
marked all the boxes Christmas presents, and had an AK in there. But anyway, so that kind of thing was, anyway,
Yeah. Now, did you have Vietnamese who would be working on any of your bases?
yes.
Okay. And what kinds of things did they do?
They were cooks, porters. One guy in Vinh Long was, I was stationed at the front gate on guard duty, and this one guy was pacing, like from one part to another, and he'd stop and then he writes pace again, and I'm going, that son of a bitch is targeting us.
Mm-hmm.
And so I told another guy about that, and the guy who was doing the pacing never saw him again.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't ask where he ended up, but it just didn't ask.
Mm-hmm.
The the Vietnamese Navy, they were just starting at Ben Luck. This would be June of 1969. They were just starting the Vietnamization of the
Mm-hmm.
Navy. And so we had, at every guard tower, we had 1 Vietnamese and 2 Americans. Every bunker, 1 Vietnamese and 2 Americans. And we were told, and we did this every day, 1 American was always awake, even in the middle of the night. 1 American was always awake, and the Vietnamese was never near any weapon. We didn't trust them at all.
Mm-hmm.
If they could get away with it, they'd go home at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, never show up. So we went, okay.
All right. Now, are there other particular things that happened in Vietnam that stand out in your memory?
After I was there about 3 weeks, and I was down in Vinh Long, I started looking around and talking to some other people who'd been there much longer than I had, and the whole arena didn't add up. Westmoreland was still there, and his big push was on body count.
Mm-hmm.
So we used to joke that a rat was 1 Viet Cong, a water buffalo was 3.
Mm-hmm.
If you shot a tree, that was 1. And I knew from talking with the guys on the PBRs, they'd say, well, I got 1, I think I winged 1, or I think I got 1, a wounded 1, saw a blood trail. You see any bodies? No. And it would end up that the body count was 3 or 4. And I ended up getting to know a lot of them quite well. And the people, our people over there were really good. There were some officers who were out to gain rank,
Mm-hmm.
and nobody trusted them. Nobody would talk to them. And and there were too many times that I saw PBRs come back shot up, and I would see sailors hugging each other, just crying, and the plastic covers would be burned off the framework of the PBR, and you would see little pieces of human flesh hanging off them. And I just, so that was hard,
Yeah.
obviously. It's been, what, 55 years.
Mhm. It's a reminder of why war is bad.
Yep, absolutely. And would I do it again? Yes. I still always sit in a restaurant with my back to the wall, always.
Mhm.
And my kids, who are 30 and 28 now, they talk about the restaurants and talk about how hard it is to hear, because I've got so much stuff going off
Mhm.
that I've lost some of my hearing. And they say, can I be heard, or can I hear people? Every time I walk out of a door, I always look 360 degrees, always, every single time. I'm never not aware of what's going on in the surroundings around me. I don't know whether that's good or bad, it just is.
It's just a condition.
Yep.
You reflex, yeah. I mean, part of that process for a lot of people. For some,
and
it's
I-
probably worse.
And I've never gone hunting after I came back from Vietnam. I had 2 shotguns and a .357 Magnum pistol, 2 .45s. When I was back first 3 or 4 years, I slept with either a gun underneath my bed or a bayonet all the time. When I was traveling in the South selling, I carried a .45 in the glove compartment, always, and it was always loaded. There was always a round in the chamber. My gun, I sold all my guns. I cannot imagine going out in the woods during hunting season again,
Mhm.
ever. I can't imagine anyone who still feels that an automatic weapon is necessary. Just,
Oh.
and was this normal? Probably not. Was my war different than a lot of other people's? Yes, very definitely. Ashaw Valley, Matterhorn, Pleiku, Khe Sanh, Way itself, very different.
Mhm.
Did I see the combat they did? No. Would I have wanted to? No. So I have the utmost respect for them,
Mhm.
which is why I never put in for a Purple Heart. I just said no.
Yeah.
And so when somebody like John Kerry ends up with 4 Purple Hearts, I know damn well, because I talked to some of the people down in the Ramsat,
The Ringside Special Zone, or whatever they called that.
special
Yeah.
zone, the very south end of the Mekong Delta. I know that one of them was fabricated, because I heard that, and I read the book, Not Fit for Command, about John Kerry, and or somebody who wears a ribbon that they're not entitled to. In any case,
Yeah. Let's kind of steer back to you. On the other side,
Yeah.
did you get an R&R while you were in Vietnam?
yes, I did. I went to Vung Tau,
Oh.
three-day R&R. Lots of barmaids all over the place. Wasn't interested. I did have a chance to go to Sydney
Mm-hmm.
on R&R. Had a good time. wonderful country. The people were as generous as they could possibly be. I never had to pay for, I never paid for a beer.
How far into your tour did you do that?
10 months.
Okay. And so,
I wanted to go to Sydney, but I was originally, I originally wanted to go to Hawaii. I was engaged to a Navy lieutenant who was stationed at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., and she said no. She was afraid of flying, and she said, no, I won't fly. I said, excuse me? You won't fly to Hawaii to see me coming from a war zone? No, I won't.
okay.
I'm not married to her anymore. I don't know why I married her in the first place. That's way off the subject.
It is off subject.
But anyway.
But the person who got engaged to her was the person you were before you went to Vietnam, too.
Yes,
Yeah. So.
that's correct.
Yeah. So okay. So you get through the year in Vietnam, but your enlistment is not up yet.
Correct.
So what do you do? We'll talk about getting out of Vietnam. What's the process for that?
You go up, you go up from your base into Saigon, and you sit around for 2 or 3 days, and then they give you a flight out. And it was a wonderful flight out. I sat next to an officer, and I think we talked. We landed, we went to Manila, then to Guam, then to Hawaii, then to San Francisco. About 22 hours. I never slept. He and I talked the whole way.
Oh.
And I have no idea who he is or where he's from. I don't remember a thing. But it was a wonderful trip. Most of my gear had been blown up, so I was flying in fatigues. And I ended up flying back here to Grand Rapids in fatigues.
Okay. So still what you were wearing back in Vietnam?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, because they weren't discharging you or anything. You were just
No.
still. Did you get a 30-day leave or something like
Yes.
that?
Yeah.
Okay. And what was it like going home at that point?
I went into the bar here in Grand Rapids and saw some people that I knew before I went. And they said, "Oh, where have you been?" And they said, "Oh, you've been in Vietnam. Oh, baby killer."
Oh, good.
I go, okay. Anyway, that's the same kind of thing.
That kind of thing. And then, so you get your 30 days, and so where do you now go? What's your new assignment?
To the Orion in Norfolk, Virginia,
Okay.
as part of the Submarine Support Assistance Team, which is called CAS-1 or Casualty 1, Priority 1, repair parts to help keep nuclear submarines on patrol or to help them prepare for patrol.
And did that ship stay in the harbor? Or did
Yes.
You, okay.
Well, it did. So I spent 3 years, 9 months, and some odd days in the Navy, and I was at sea for 8 days. So the Orion unmoored itself and traveled out the Chesapeake to the Atlantic Ocean and went south to Panama City, Florida, and then it turned around and it came back. So it's what they called the kiddie cruise, to get the coffee grounds off the bottom of the boat. And that was my extent of sea duty in the Navy.
And so with the Orion, did you actually live on the ship, or were you on shore someplace in barracks?
We lived on the ship. Spent every weekend up in Washington where my fiance was, and then got out. But it was interesting. I worked with a particular submarine, and that commanding officer gave me a letter of recommendation for the work that I'd done. NATO also gave me one for the work that I'd done. So those were kind of nice. Kind of a surprise, but
Okay. And when you get out of the Navy, when do you actually leave the Navy?
End of October of 1969.
Okay. And then did you just come back to Michigan after that? Or?
Yes, before I went to Vietnam, after I completed SEER training, I wrote the University of Michigan and I wrote Michigan State.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I'm on my way to Vietnam. I'd like to talk to one of your admissions counselors about being admitted as an undergraduate student in January of 1970.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up talking with some second assistant junior flunky at Michigan who was unimpressed by my scholastic career, even though I'd taken courses at Old Dominion College in Norfolk at night school.
Yeah.
And at Michigan State, I ended up talking with a director who said, it's obvious you know what you're doing. You're welcome here for January of 1970. So that's what I did.
All right. And what kind of career track did you wind up in?
I ended up working for a couple of major companies located here.
Mm-hmm.
Ended up becoming a district manager responsible for about 150, 200 million in sales out of Chicago. And ended up getting my master's from Kellogg School at Northwestern. And I also was accepted at the University of Chicago, but I ended up going to Northwestern. So I have my MBA. And then after I left Steelcase, I was remarried and asked my wife, I said, I want to start my own company. Will you support me? She said, of course. So I started my consulting company doing competitive intelligence and have kept at that for 35 years. Been, frankly, quite successful and really enjoyed it. And I only have to take orders from myself.
So when you look back at your time in the Navy, what do you, I mean, you talked some about some of the effects or the PTSD kinds of effects that you've had, but otherwise, what do you think you took out of it or what did you learn from it?
I'm trying to figure out how to say this. I came from a fairly privileged background. Obviously, I was a late bloomer. If I had not gone in the Navy, I would not have experienced any of this. I would not have met people from all walks of life. From a gentleman by the name of Jerry Crow, who was a second-class yeoman, who was making the Navy a career. And I said, why don't you get out and go back home? And he said, why? I said, I live in Cherokee Reservation. I'm full-blooded Cherokee, and we have no electricity, and the floor of our hut is dirt.
Mm-hmm.
Why would I go back? And I was so embarrassed.
Mm-hmm.
If I had not had those experiences, I would not be where I am today. It's been difficult because I was enlisted. Most of my friends were officers. I was enlisted in the Navy for 4 years. Very few people in East Grand Rapids were even close to the military.
Mm-hmm.
So there's not that much in common.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I really do credit the Navy for teaching me a lot. I'd do it again.
All right. Well, it makes for a good story and a valuable one, so I'd just like to thank you for taking the time to share it today.
Absolutely.
All right. This will take a moment.